morning, ladies. It's so nice to be here all the way from Alabama, a little lower Alabama, Enterprise. And I just wanted to thank Carrie and her whole family and Christy for being so very welcoming to me and helping organize this several months back even. So thank you for this opportunity. The topic of mental health is a really timely one, I think. It's kind of a health crisis unto itself. And I'm just so honored to speak on this topic that speaks so personally to my heart. I noticed we all have lovely name tags on, except for me, because mine get stuck in my hair. And I, for a long time, felt like if I had a name tag, it would say, "Hello, my name is Depression," because I felt like that's all people could see when they looked at me. I've been diagnosed with severe major depressive disorder for about 4 years now, but I feel like I've been suffering from that much longer than my official diagnosis. Throughout this trying season, one of my deepest desires was that some kind of good would come out of all that time of suffering, and surely speaking to a group of ladies like this is an answer to that prayer. So throughout this first session, I want to give you a glimpse into what it is like to suffer from anxiety and depression. A lot of people kind of think they know, well, depression is just feeling sad, right? And anxiousness is just feeling worried. But it goes so much beyond that into physical symptoms, mental symptoms, and I want to give you a better idea of what it's like to have either of those disorders. And in the second session, we're going to dig into our Bibles and look at several Bible characters who have suffered from anxiety and depression, and to see what verses in the Bible can give you comfort if you happen to suffer from either of those. And then in the last session, well, besides the Q&A, we will talk about how you can get help if you're having a mental illness, or how you yourself can help other people who struggle with mental illness. All right, so let's dig into it. Mental illness has become a crisis of health in the United States. According to the National Alliance on Mental Health, 1 in 5 adults will suffer from a mental health illness each year. 1 in 20 adults will suffer from a severe mental health illness, and they usually categorize severe as being you're not able to work anymore or function in your day-to-day life. What's really scary is that 1 in 6 youth, ages 6 to 17, will experience a mental health disorder each year. And suicide is the second leading cause of death in people aged 10 to 34. Those are scary statistics and show just how prevalent mental illness is amongst Americans. And anxiety and depression top the charts as the 2 most common mental illnesses that people experience. Anxiety makes up for about 19% of all diagnosed mental illnesses, and depression accounts for about 8.5% of those. And females tend to be particularly at risk for mental health disorders. About 51.2% of all diagnosed mental health disorders are females, comparing that to only 37.4% for males. Now you'll notice my math doesn't exactly add up, but that's because there's a whole specific bracket for gay, lesbian, LGBTQ, and amongst that population, about 54% of them suffer from mental health disorders, which is another topic for another day, but very interesting all the same. One of the things that makes anxiety and depression and mental health in general so scary is the poor treatment rate for these diagnoses. Of those reported with mental illness, only 46.2% actually receive treatment for these disorders. So there's a huge percentage of people walking around with mental illness that never get medication, that never get therapy, that never get any kind of treatment. And that's just from reported cases. Millions of cases of undiagnosed mental illnesses make the numbers I reported grossly underestimated. One of the reasons mental illnesses so frequently fall through the cracks is because there's a lack of understanding surrounding these diagnoses. Mental illness is often called an invisible illness, and for good reason. Mental illness is not as obvious as a broken leg or pneumonia or diabetes. The tests to diagnose mental illnesses are not very straightforward. There's no x-ray to diagnose that. There's no blood test to diagnose a mental illness. Usually they are checklists, and patients have to self-report, so it's very easy to fall through the cracks. You would think it would be very obvious to the person suffering from a mental health condition that they have a mental health condition, but it's so easy to ascribe these different symptoms to something else. So for example, one of the most common symptoms of depression is heavy fatigue. Well, when I had a newborn, I thought all my fatigue was because I have a newborn and she's waking me up at all hours of the day and night. But looking back, I know I had postpartum depression, and some of my fatigue was because of the depression. But again, it was so easy to just write it off as, well, you have a nursing child, so of course you're tired. And, for someone with anxiety, you might have something like heart palpitations where your heart's racing, but that's easy to write off as, well, I've had too many cups of coffee today, obviously, something like that. So it's just very easy to brush off some of these symptoms as something else, and then your mental health disorder goes unchecked. I attributed some of my lackluster for life as having, well, you have 2 children under 2. Of course you're feeling lackluster. You're at home a lot. Your baby needs you. Your 18-month-old needs you. But looking back, I definitely had a postpartum depression. And what's worse, I never got treatment for it. I wanted to read one of my entries from my book. I have a book called Milk Drunk, Diary of a First-Time Mom, and it contains my journal entries from the time I had kids that were 2 under 2. So if any of you have children that small or want to remember what it's like to have children that small, this book might be for you. But I wanted to read to you 2 of my journal entries from that time when I feel like I had an undiagnosed postpartum depression. Dear girls, I think I may be struggling with some postpartum depression. I never seem really happy anymore. Even now, visiting home, I'm still sad and still mystified by the sheer amount of work that goes into having 2 small children. I mourn the loss of the body I once had. I feel myself slipping away as adult conversation is replaced by talking about colors and numbers. How can I both love and resent motherhood simultaneously? I feel so weighed down sometimes by a baby who is rarely happy. I hate seeing the hurt in Aurora's eyes when she wants to be held, and Iris gets to stay in my arms because she needs me more. I feel trapped because getting out of the house is so impossible. I'm on a perpetual nursing clock. I get tired of swimming the emotional highs and lows of each day as I get sweet kisses from my girls, but then stay up all night with insomnia or a fussy baby. I hate feeling like I'm in a valley of motherhood, like I'm just trying to survive the day. I pray that you girls can't tell when I don't particularly want to read that book for the 13th time in a row, or when I don't want to nurse again when I just finished 30 minutes ago. I know this is just a season, and one day I will look back at pictures from this time and feel silly for resenting wearing my hair up every day for months. It looks like it's going to be a long, lonely winter. I'm praying for healing and manna from heaven to get me through each day with as much joy, love, and hope as possible. I want you girls to know that you are loved deeply, even when I have sad days. Your hugs and smiles keep me going. Love, Mommy. Dear girls, postpartum depression is so cruel. Last night, Iris stayed awake until 3:30 a.m. and only slept for an hour before waking up again. All during this time, I had to fight off anger and terrible thoughts of wanting to give up on the whole business of mothering. I woke up this morning in tears over my angry feelings. I actually told my sweet Iris to shut up last night. For the first time ever, I saw how some parents are driven to shake their babies. So cruel, especially when you are so little and can't help that you want to be held. How could I be angry at such a natural response? And yet, there I was, cursing my responsibilities, feeling all my facial muscles tighten as you called out for my warmth, smell, and protection while you slept. As I held you in my arms this morning to nurse, I cried and sent up all sorts of silent apologies in my embrace, hoping you would understand and forgive me. That isn't me. I'm not mean to my children. I do not lose my temper. But last night it happened, and I'm so sorry. Mercifully, God gave me grace and lifted my mood. The huge, ugly weight lifted off, and life looked more cheery. I can enjoy you girls without feeling the existential weight of an endless cycle of diaper changes and fussy nights. I was glad to hold Iris and nurse 1,000 times today. I don't pretend to understand hormones, but I know they are powerful enough to turn you into the ugliest version of yourself. I hope I never see that monster come out again. As the new year approaches, I am determined to thrive and not just survive. I love you girls so much. Please forgive my shortcomings. Love, Mommy. Now, if you're thinking my book is really sad, I promise it's not. Most of it's really funny, actually, and a lot of good memories in there, too. But that's just the reality of it. For postpartum depression, it comes, and nothing can really prepare you for it. But my book kind of goes into that a little bit, too. Another reason anxiety and depression doesn't always get diagnosed when it should is that the symptoms are not necessarily every day. So I thought to have a depression, you had to be sad every single day, and I certainly had breaks from my melancholy, and that's simply not the case. You can still have depression or anxiety and not feel that way every moment of every day. So sometimes it's hard to get diagnosed with a mental health disorder because it's hard to figure out what's going on. And the road to getting an official diagnosis can be quite long. In fact, my husband in his college years had to drop out of school for 2 years because he had so many physical and mental symptoms that no one could really put the pieces together and figure out what in the world was wrong with him until finally he was diagnosed with a severe anxiety disorder. But that took over a year to diagnose, and in the meantime, he suffered. Some people know they have a mental health trouble, but don't want to seek out help because they've heard horror stories about the medications and what they can do to you. Or they're worried about the stigma that might be attached with having a mental illness. I think we've made a lot of progress in making it less of a stigma, but there's still some of that out there today. I know I've had to come a long ways in being willing to accept and tell other people that I've got a mental health disorder. So for now, I want to move into some of the ins and outs of mental illnesses. We've talked a little bit about why it's hard to get diagnosed. We've talked about the statistics and how many people suffer. And so now I want to dig deep into what anxiety and depression are really like in and of themselves. I was once told that I was too pretty to have depression, and that's as ridiculous as saying I am too pretty to pay my taxes or too pretty to have a broken leg or something like that. And the truth is, anxiety and depression can affect absolutely anyone, no matter what your situation is in life. Sometimes you have a depression because of a certain situation. Someone fighting in a war zone comes back with post-traumatic stress disorder, or a mother or a wife who's lost a child or a husband ends up with a situational depression just because events in their life are so sad around them. But sometimes it's neither of those. Like in my case, I like to tell people all the time when they ask about my depression, my life's a bowl of cherries. I have a really good life. I have many blessings, nothing to complain about. In fact, whenever I've seen therapists, they don't know what to do with me because I have nothing sad to talk about, and my childhood was really rosy and golden. Like I have no trauma to talk through. So for me, my depression was not situational in any way. Mine was purely a chemical imbalance, much like someone can have a blood sugar imbalance. So situational or not, mental illnesses are the results of imbalances in the brain, most often brain chemicals. So the three major brain chemicals that you have to have in balance are serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine. And without a perfect balance of those three, you're going to have a variety of mental health disabilities. Again, much like someone with diabetes has an imbalance in their blood sugar and their insulin, someone with depression or anxiety has an imbalance in their brain chemicals. And those imbalances result in either underactivity of the brain or overactivity of the brain. So if you're anxious, your brain, in fact, they've shown this on PET scans, your brain lights up too much. There's overactivity there. On the other hand, if you have depression like me, the brain actually it's the whole color blue because it's not activating. So there really is something to that. I'm feeling blue. Your brain on a PET scan will actually light up blue from underactivity. You can no more tell a person with a chemical imbalance to snap out of it than you can tell someone with diabetes to snap out of their low blood sugar episode. No amount of yoga, mindfulness, and right eating alone can cure a blood chemical imbalance, and medication and other treatment is necessary in addition to these healthy lifestyle choices. And some people experience a mix of mental illnesses. You don't have to just have depression. You can have depression and anxiety. Or if you're bipolar, you'll have some of both, or a lot of depression and then some mania, over times of overexcitement. If you have PTSD, anxiety is going to come part and parcel with your diagnosis. So let's go into some detail about anxiety and depression. I'm going to break them into mental symptoms and physical symptoms. The mental symptoms you may have a bit of familiarity with already, some of the worrying that happens, but not a lot of people go into the bodily symptoms you can experience with an anxiety or a depression. So the anxiety comes with an array of mental and physical symptoms that happen when the body's fight or flight response is overactive. These can include persistent worrying or anxiety about a number of areas that are out of proportion to the impact of events. So I have an example of this. I have a brother-in-law who has anxiety disorder, and he needed a new car. And he got into this huge analysis paralysis, if you will, just could not decide, worried so much about it. It was almost a life or death decision for him. And it was just about his car. And he had a similar episode in deciding whether or not to propose to my sister, who he's now married to. He was in such a bad state of anxiety, he worried about all the worst case scenarios. Am I good enough for her? Are we going to have a happy future? Just over worried, out of proportion with the situation. You might overthink plans and solutions to all possible worst case scenarios. You may perceive situations and events as threatening, even when they aren't. So one of the anxiety disorders is actually hoarding, so keeping too much in your house. And for them, letting an item go, they perceive that as very threatening to their existence, even though it may just be a bit of garbage. You may have difficulty handling uncertainty, indecisiveness, and fear of making the wrong decision. So again, that analysis paralysis. Inability to set aside or let go of a worry. I've had people with anxiety describe that as being on the hamster wheel in the brain or the washing machine. It just goes round and around and around, and you just can't let it go. Your brain fixates on those certain thoughts. Inability to relax, feeling restless, and feeling keyed up or on edge. My husband, who has anxiety, definitely experiences all of these, difficulty relaxing. In fact, I sometimes joke, we both have mental health trouble, so we can joke about it, that when he's anxious, we get a whole lot done at the house. One time he had a bad anxious episode, he cleared out the entire basement. It was fabulous. So just a little silver lining there. But again, he couldn't stop, he couldn't relax. His body had to keep him moving, so he channeled that into productive energy. Some people like to work out as a way to relieve some of that stress, but he cleans out our basement, so win for us. You might have difficulty concentrating or feeling like your mind just goes blank. Sometimes individuals with ADHD have some anxiety, and that difficulty concentrating is a huge symptom for them. Constant replay of conversations with others and worrying you have somehow offended them. This is a huge one for a lot of people. I know my mother, who doesn't have anxiety necessarily, but she struggles with replaying the conversations over and over again and worrying she's offended someone. If I'm even remotely not as chipper as normal, she's like, "Are you upset with me? What did I do? Are we okay?" You know, or I had a lady at church who just playfully commented on my husband's favorite football team, and then she had to call back 2 days later like, "I'm so sorry I made that comment about your football team. Are we okay? Are you okay?" And it was just a joking, like, "How about those Yellow Jackets?" Because he goes for Georgia Tech. So just very much over worrying about offending someone. You might have racing thoughts. Again, that hamster wheel that you can't get off of. Or perseverant thoughts, which is just a fancy way of saying I can't stop thinking about it. And you might have a general sense that something bad is going to happen, just a sense of doom. I have, my grandmother has since passed, but she had anxiety too. We just have a lot of mental health struggles in my family. I don't know what's wrong with us. But she had made a chocolate pie, and it had meringue on the top, and the meringue had cracked. And it just like broke her entire day. She was worried that the whole Thanksgiving dinner was ruined, and she had ruined it. And what are we going to do? This pie is now inedible. It wasn't. It was delicious. It just had a crack in the meringue, but she had anxiety, and she couldn't let these kinds of thoughts go. Her brain made the mountains out of the molehills. So those are just some of the mental thought processes that can come with anxiety. But there's a lot that goes on in your body as well with anxiety. You can have fatigue, for one thing. A lot of people who are anxious have trouble sleeping because they can't get off the thought wheel. So they'll be very fatigued, but they have trouble resting too. So it's kind of a vicious cycle of fatigue. I need the rest, but I can't relax. I can't get the rest, which makes me more tired, which makes me more anxious, which makes it harder to relax. You can see that vicious cycle. Again, you can have trouble sleeping. You can have an unusual lightness in the limbs. My husband describes that sometimes as like he almost feels a bit floaty, like gravity isn't holding him to the ground properly, which can be very distressing. By the way, depression is opposite. You feel lead-laden with depression. You can have panic attacks. I know lots of us have those. And with a panic attack, you quite literally feel like you are dying or having a heart attack. You can have persistent dizziness, sweating, trembling or feeling twitchy, nervousness or being easily startled. You can have stomach upsets like nausea, diarrhea, or irritable bowel syndrome. And you can be very irritable as well. So for my husband, he doesn't really have as many of the mental symptoms. He doesn't have the hamster wheel, the analysis paralysis, but he has all of these physical symptoms, which is why he was so hard to diagnose with anxiety. He wasn't a constant worrier. But he had dizzy, he has panic attacks, he was sweating, he was trembling, he had stomach upsets, and the doctors went through all these tests to figure out what was wrong. Ended up being not a physical disorder, but a mental health disorder. And once he got on the proper medication, all those disorders of the body went away. So it's amazing what that brain-body connection can do and how ill it can really make you feel. And if you ever want to learn more about anxiety, my husband, who's a minister, has suffered with it for, 2 decades now, I guess. And I can put you in contact with him. He's a great counselor as well. So if that's something you want to talk about or learn more about, my husband is really kind of a good authority to go to for that. So just let me know and I'll get you that contact information. So on the other side, we talked about brain chemicals. So both anxiety and depression are the direct result of insufficient serotonin. You don't have enough serotonin in your brain. And it can manifest like two sides of a coin. Anxiety on the one side of the coin, and now we'll talk about depression, the other side of the serotonin coin. If the anxiety has the brain overstimulated, then depression has the brain severely understimulated. Depression wears many hats and can look a lot of different ways depending on the sufferer. Some of the symptoms can include feeling of sadness and loss of interest. I like to tell people I am their Eeyore of the group. I'm kind of constantly living in a gloomy place, but I'm happy to be there. I'm just glad my friends have included me. I'm thankful for the Pooh Bears and Piglets in my life, And the loss of interest is huge. For the longest time, I'm a musician, which I think was mentioned in our introduction. I'm a pianist. And when depression was at its worst for me, I had no interest in music. I didn't want to listen to music. I found it too jarring. I didn't touch the piano for 2 years after having taken 10 years of lessons and having jobs that required me to play the piano. And I just had no interest in it anymore. You might have tearfulness, and we call that emotional lability. And so the tearfulness isn't always a direct result of being sad. I used to tell people I would get crying fits the way some people get hiccups. It would just come on me all of a sudden with no possible trigger. So you can have that kind of tearfulness, and you would have a sense of hopelessness. Hopelessness is a big one for depression. The rational mind knows that eventually some medication, some treatment is going to make you better. But when you suffer from depression, all you can see is the suffering right in front of you. And you don't feel that hope of, I'll probably get better, so I need to just hang on a little longer. You might have angry outbursts, irritability, or frustration. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the irritability. When you have depression or any mental health illness, it's like all the senses of your body are turned up. So like the volume in my ears felt twice as loud, And I hated being touched. It made my skin crawl. And I had 2 children under 2 at the time, mind you, and all they want to do is touch mommy. So that was very, very difficult for me because it just made me cringe. And like, sights look too bright, sound is too jarring. I got where I don't even like watching TV or movies anymore because it's a bit of sensory overload. And I especially feel that at the movie theater where the sound is way too loud anyway. And the screen is really big. So yeah, you can get irritability or frustration, and when your senses are turned up like that, everything becomes a trigger. Every, slam of a cabinet door, every time my child crawls on me makes me irritable. You'll have a loss of interest or pleasure in most all normal activities, hobbies, sex, sports, things you used to like to do, you won't want to do anymore. You get to a place where nothing really sounds good. I feel like my children do that sometimes in the summer, It's like, what you want to do? You want to color? No. You want to play on the trampoline? No. So nothing really sounds good. Well, in all seriousness, depression can feel that way sometimes. You can have sleep disturbances, and it's usually going to go one of 2 ways. Either you're going to be the person who can't sleep, a severe insomniac, or like me, you're going to be the person who sleeps too much. I often tell people sleeping is my superpower, even though I'm a lot better now than I was 4 years ago, and I'm super grateful. I've got some lingering things that I still struggle with, and sleep is one of them. Left to my own devices, I could sleep all day and sleep all night, and I still go to bed around 9, most days just shortly after I put my kids to bed. It frustrates my husband because that's time we could be spending together, but I just need the sleep. You can have tiredness or lack of energy, so that even small tasks take extra effort. I tell people that depression tired is a little bit like pregnant tired, is a little bit like I have the flu tired. It's just an unnatural sense of tiredness that can't be explained by, oh, well, I had a really busy day, or I didn't sleep well. I could sleep for 12 hours straight and the next day just be so tired still. So sleep disturbances. You can have weight changes. I've done both ends of the spectrum. At my worst, I was about 124 pounds because I wouldn't eat. I was really, really depressed, and I just had no appetite. Eating felt really hard. And then on the other side of the coin is I've gotten on medications that have lovely side effects like weight gain. Now I'm on the other end of the spectrum. I've eaten too much, and now I've gained weight. So you can do either one of those with depression. You can have slowed thinking, speaking, and body movements. Slowed thinking, speaking, and body movements is called psychomotor retardation. I had a ton of this. I would walk slow. My speech would be slow and slurred. You would think I'd had a stroke or something serious like that because I was so affected. And there were days when all I could do was sit in my rocking chair and kind of stare into the abyss. And I would speak maybe one sentence the entire day. I would move maybe once. In fact, I got catatonic at one point and had to be hospitalized for that. So anyway, psychomotor retardation, slowed thinking, speaking, and moving can be a huge part of depression. You can have feelings of worthlessness, guilt, or fixating on past failures or self-blame. I suffered with all of these. I felt really worthless because I wasn't achieving very much. All growing up and in my early adulthood, I was an achiever. Got all A's in school, got all A's in grad school, made good strides in my career, had 2 beautiful children, spoke at events like this, achieving, getting a lot done at home, and I really put my worth into that. But when you have depression as severe as I did, and suddenly you go from achieving to I'm sitting in a rocking chair breathing, and that's all I'm capable of doing, I felt completely worthless because I had put all my worth in my productivity. So I struggled with that so much. And I had tremendous feelings of guilt because I wasn't able to parent properly. I couldn't play with my kids. I couldn't feed them dinner. I couldn't even really hug them because it physically hurt to be hugged at the time. Couldn't tuck them in for bed. And there's a tremendous feeling of guilt when you can't take care of your family like you feel like you should. Or I had to quit working, so the tremendous guilt of I'm not bringing in any income or doing anything to build my resume. And I focused a lot on self-blame, like maybe this depression was my fault somehow. What kind of way had I sinned to deserve this? And again, a lot of that's distorted thinking, and we'll talk about that in the how to help section, but that was truly how I felt at the time. You may have trouble thinking, concentrating, making decisions, and even remembering things. I had severe amnesia during this time. For example, my little sister, my only sister, got married in 2020 during the COVID pandemic, and I was the maid of honor. And I have no memories of going to that wedding, none. And I think it was because my depression was so bad at the time, I think my brain was doing that protecting you from pain sort of amnesia that can happen when people have like a motor vehicle accident and they don't remember what happened. The brain's giving them kind of an amnesia to protect itself. I have very few memories from 2020 in general, and even some of 2021. And so depression can affect your memory for sure. You can have frequent, recurring thoughts of death, suicidal thoughts, suicidal attempts, or suicide. I have frequently wished for death. Thankfully, I've never attempted suicide. I've got a great support network that won't let me be physically alone when I'm feeling that bad, and will even lock away my medicine, any sharp objects. I've just got a really good support network, so that was not an issue, but I have certainly wished for death multiple times. And you can have unexplained physical problems like back pain or frequent migraines. I get migraines pretty often. So mental illness, particularly severe mental illness, leaves no aspect of your life untouched. Some of the unintended consequences of mental illness include losing work. Both my husband and I had to drop out of work at different points in our lives. My husband had to drop out of college for 2 whole years while he got his anxiety disorder under control. I had to quit my job as a speech-language pathologist, and I've only, just in the last 6 months, returned to working. I've accepted a new job and have started that, and I'm really enjoying it, but I could not work for a good 3 years, I suppose, because to be a speech pathologist, you have to be able to talk with people, you have to be able to communicate, you have to be very mentally sharp to make the correct diagnoses and remember things, and those were all things I just was not capable of at the time. You can have damaged relationships. This one's huge. I know the dynamic in my marriage changed tremendously because suddenly the well individual has to pick up all the slack for the sick individual. So I know like my husband took over like the cooking and grocery shopping because I was just not capable of it, and he took on the majority of the child rearing at that time because it was all I could do just to breathe in and out at the time. One of the cruelest things about the depression is that it gives you an inability to feel love and pleasure. So, for example, my kids will hug me. Even to this day, I'll hug my children, and I don't get that rush of love, of warmth, of joy that you would normally feel from hugging someone or seeing someone you know and care about, because depression puts a wall between you and feeling pleasure of any kind. Your friendships can change. When you have depression, you want to isolate. You want to get away from people. So you may ghost your friends, as we say. You may not text back. You may not call back. You may go radio silent for a while. And you may seem like a bad friend because you're not being there for your friends. You can engage in risky behavior. Many people with mental illness suffer from risky behavior. They feel so numb from their illness that they'll do anything and everything just to feel something. So this can include adrenaline sports, body modification. I know for me, I did a lot of impulse shopping. Something about getting packages in the mail made me feel, I like Amazon, right? Like I felt better having an Amazon package in the mail. So you might do impulse spending. This is where a lot of people come in with their alcoholism and drug use. So this is all part of the risky behaviors that you do, so you can feel anything at all. Some people have medicine misuse. One of the biggest hurdles to taking mental health medications is remembering to take them every day. A lot of people will come on and off their meds. without express direct from the doctor, which is horrible for your mental health, just awful. And some people will overtake the meds. They think, well, if one pill makes me feel better, how might 5 pills make me feel? And that can have horrible consequences too. We already talked about the weight changes you'll have. Again, I've done both sides. I've done the weight loss, I've done the weight gain, and I gotta say, I like the weight loss better if I had to choose. You can have complete changes in your personality. I know for a fact I'm a different person now than I was 4 years ago. I used to be on the extrovert scale, and now I'm definitely considering myself an introvert. A lot of things about my personality have been tamped down by the depression, and I'm slowly climbing out of that and refinding myself, but it's just taking a long time, and I'm a different person than I was 4 years ago. You can have a loss of faith. A lot of people that go through mental health struggles end up losing their faith over it. And I know I came closest to this when I had a miscarriage 2 years ago. It wasn't a planned pregnancy, but we were happy to have the baby. And the miscarriage was the worst thing that's ever happened to me in my entire life. And I was so angry with God. You know, why did the baby have to go? And that was the closest I've ever come to losing my faith. You may even have thoughts of suicide. So again, no aspect of your life goes untouched when you have a mental illness. It affects absolutely everything. And as I bring this first session to a close, what I wanted to do was read to you some more of my journal entries. These are not from ones in my current book, but they're ones I'm putting in my next book that focuses on mental health. And I can talk about statistics and symptoms all day long, but I think it resonates more when you hear the thoughts of someone actually suffering from that disorder. So I'm going to read for you a couple of my journal entries. And try very hard not to cry. I'm starting to wonder if I will ever fully recover from depression. I continued to spiral downhill with a migraine a couple days ago. And then yesterday, I was balled up on the couch, crying and twitching. I am so sensitive to sound right now. My ears have their volume turned up to twice as loud for every little sound. I don't want to be touched or held or climbed on. I want to shrink down and disappear so small that I'm invisible. The world can ask me no questions, I can hear no sounds, and time can stand absolutely still until I feel better enough to regrow into my normal size. My soul is floundering around for something, anything to make me feel happier. Caffeine, mail, thinking of visiting home, reading my Bible, endless home improvement, and the relief is so very temporary. I am restless, agitated, discontent, and numb. My skin feels like it's crawling, and my body is in physical pain from being so distressed. The more I learn about depression, the more I realize how long I've been struggling with it. Depression can come slowly and stealthily. I used to love music and playing the piano. I was in a band once. Now, over the last several years, I've hardly listened to any music. Most of it is too loud and too jarring. I almost never play the piano after having done 10 years of lessons. I used to dance. I wouldn't even think about that now. So many interests I've lost to depression without even realizing it. Am I remotely the same person I was 10 years ago? Are the core elements of my personality still in there in any degree? In this long recovery, I'm going to have to get reacquainted with myself, to try and gradually wake up parts of me that have been asleep for years. My biggest fear now is that depression is a demon I'll have to fight against my whole life. I sincerely hope that isn't going to be the case. I love you girls more than anything. I'm fighting this battle for you as much as for me. Love, Mommy. I feel like my soul is rotting. Is that even possible? For the bits and pieces of yourself to slowly slough away until there's nothing left? I'm trying so hard to hold on to the bits of myself that I can remember, but even the core of my being is slipping away. I am trying to take care of my family in the only way I know how right now, helping things around the house be beautiful, since I feel like my very presence is ugly. I am only living a half life. I'm haunting my own home with tears and twitching and many worried glances thrown my way. I take the meds, get in the sun, strap on the roller skates, obsess over home projects, Pray and beg God to take it away, but nothing. Months later, and I am still slipping away. I can feel the depression gaining ground in my life more and more. I'm so weary of crying about nothing, of never knowing how I will feel from day to day, or even hour to hour. My teeth are sore from all the gritting. My dreams are haunted. I feel truly crazy. I am ready for this chapter of my life to be over and get to a better time. Instead, I have to gear up for another day of battle, another day of fighting, another day of just surviving and finding the will to live. I love you girls so much, and I'm so sorry you have to watch me struggle like this. Love, Mommy. I know what it is like to want to die, to be hurting so much that you just want it to be over. It is so difficult to explain depression to other people, particularly because it comes in so many flavors. Yesterday, it was like someone was pushing the grief part of my brain to its utmost limit, making me feel as sad and hopeless as possible. It physically hurts and makes my body twitch and tremble. I cried for a solid hour last night, went through 2 handkerchiefs. But after that storm, I started to feel a lot better, and today has been a pretty good day. And that's what healing looks like. Some good days, many bad ones, desperately holding on to the end of your rope, and then tying a knot at the end to hang on some more. I still pray for the depression to go away, but more than anything, I am praying for endurance to withstand the suffering. It is so unbelievably painful and crippling. Mom keeps telling me that God will use this suffering for good, but I'm so ready to be on the other side. Love, Mommy. And then I wanted to close with a sort of poem that I wrote about depression called The Floor. For the depressed person, the floor is a homing beacon. Sometimes the bed or the couch is suitable for crying, but most often, when I'm at my absolute lowest, I need the floor. I'll slump down to the kitchen floor, folded in a tight ball with my head buried in my arms. I'll go face down on the carpet and claw at the shaggy fibers. If it's really bad, the floor inside isn't good enough. I go outside and lay in the grass, begging the earth to swallow me whole. Perhaps the floor takes us back to our toddler reflexes, when the floor was the only appropriate place for a meltdown. Maybe I'm helping gravity by giving the tears less distance to fall. Possibly gravity is stronger on the depressed person, and the attraction to the earth is unavoidable. The floor is the most humble, most broken, and most bare place to dwell. Perhaps that is why we are encouraged to kneel when we pray, so we can approach God in humility and wait for him to bring us up. If I must be on the floor, let my tears, like those of the sinful woman, wash Jesus' feet in some way. Transform my sorrow into something beautiful and useful. After all, there are countless dirty feet here to wash on the floor. All right, so that's going to wrap up our first session. We'll have about a 15-minute break and meet back at 10:30. Is that right? All right, and then we'll talk about what the Bible has to say about